Howdy folks, and welcome back to Pecan Ranch. Today I want to talk to you about the things that you need on the farm to start a farm and to maintain a farm. And we're going to talk about equipment. We're going to talk about equipment and supplies that we're going to keep, that you need to keep on a farm. Some of these items aren't necessarily going to be necessities, but they're going to be more, not even really, I wouldn't call them luxury items, but they'll make your life a ton easier. A lot of these things I will classify as things that you just absolutely need. So we'll get started with that, and I'll go over a few key pieces of equipment that help keep Pecan Ranch operational. So I'm going to start, as far as equipment goes, with the, in my opinion, my best tool that I have out here, my best piece of equipment. This is my side-by-side. It is a Kawasaki Mule 610 two-seater. This is my daily driver. And I mean it whenever I say daily driver. This thing gets used every single day. It is an invaluable piece of equipment on the farm. So I'm gonna go over basically the equipment that I keep on this mule and also the benefits of having one. Some may consider this a luxury item. I do not. I would say that if for some reason this thing went down and I couldn't fix it, or it was more expensive to fix than to buy another one, the first priority would be replacing this mule and getting another side-by-side, because it is an invaluable, useful tool to have on the farm. I say this because I would say just budget for one. I would gladly skimp on some other areas to ensure that I'd have something like this. I would say, now it depends on your operation, but I would say I'd rather have one of these than a tractor. And I'll tell you why. The reason why is because if you absolutely need it, most of the time, there's a lot of stuff that a tractor is super useful. And I have the benefit of having a really cool neighbor, and they let me use their tractor all the time. Now, even if I didn't though, I would prefer this to a tractor. The reason is this has everyday useful applications, whereas a tractor, it has pretty useful applications, but you don't always need a tractor. And if you absolutely needed one, there's a lot of things you can do without a tractor, and it just takes more work. But if you absolutely needed one for a major project or something, you can rent one. These, on the other hand, at least in my area, you can't rent one. So let's start off with kind of the basics here. Having a four-seater would be nice. In fact, we're considering adding another side-by-side to the farm, and probably, almost definitely, it will be a four-seater, but a two-seater will do. This thing in particular is a 610cc motor, which does provide it with a decent amount of power. These things are not particularly fast. It's not like a Polaris RZR, which is more of a sport 4x4 type deal. It's more along the lines of a workhorse. It's why it's called the Mule. This thing has four-wheel drive, which is extremely useful, but I will say that a lot of the times this thing gets by good on two-wheel drive. In some of the stickiest situations, I rarely have to drop it in four-wheel drive, but when I do, it is absolutely necessary to have it. They do sell models that don't have four-wheel drive, and I would recommend steering more towards getting a four-wheel drive. I know it may cost you a little bit more, but it's worthwhile. I paid $1,500 for this thing. I don't think that it is likely to assume that you can find a deal like that, but I would typically, a used one will range anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000, depending upon condition and your area and what the market basically allows for. I would happily pay $5,000 for another one. Now, before I had this, I didn't think I would ever spend that type of money on one of these, but after having this and using it every single day for months now, I would say that I would happily pay $5 grand. In fact, honestly, if there was nothing on the used market and I absolutely needed one, I'd buy a new one. I'd pay the $10, $12, $13, $14,000 that it takes to buy a new one if there was, you know, for whatever reason, there was no used ones on the market at all for months on end. I would bite the bullet and I'd spend that type of money. Obviously, every situation is different, but I'd highly recommend just budgeting for one. If you're planning on starting a farm, you're getting ready to buy a piece of property, if it is a large enough piece of property, and honestly, even if you only have 1 or 2 acres, just getting things moved around 1 or 2 acres, this is valuable to have, and I'd just budget for one if I were you. Now, what are the major benefits of this thing? Haul and feed. Hauling feed, hauling hay, hauling straw, hauling anything. This thing will do it. Now, this truck bed isn't giant, I'll tell you that. But what you can do, most of them come with a receiver hitch. And I have this very handy hitch on here, and it has got a 2-inch ball, and it also has right here a the hitch setup for like UTV trailers, garden tractor trailers, which I'll show you real quick what they look like. And that is this type of hitch setup right here, which is for, like in this case, a UTV trailer, which I'll get to that in a moment. That's another piece of equipment I highly recommend if you have a side-by-side, or even if you just have a lawnmower. Those things will attach to a lot of zero turns or larger riding mowers. So on this, we have a rifle bag, and it rarely carries rifles. I'll discuss that a little bit in the intro, but it's useful to hold all of my tools. I don't remember honestly the exact cost of this thing off the top of my head, but it wasn't that expensive. And in this thing, I'll carry my everyday carry on this mule. Is I carry a mini sledge, I carry fence pliers, which are super useful tools for anything involving barbed wire or any wire fencing of any kind. I carry a fence stretcher and a machete in here as well. If I can get this open one-handed here. So I've got this little guy, looks like bolt cutters, but they're not really. They are fence splicing tools. Don't really use it all that often, honestly, but it is useful to keep just in case, and I have the room for it. Carry a small machete just in case you're out and you need to trim up some vines or something like that while you're out running the fence line. You see something that needs to be addressed, you can address it. And that's the purpose of keeping all of these things on here. So this is your fence stretcher if you need to do any work with barbed wire or high tensile fence of any kind. And that's what I keep in here, as well as some T-post clip tools, some T-post clips and some cable splices and things of that nature, if I can get to them here. And also this little handy guy for rolling out wire. I have bigger wire rollers, but that one's just the one that I keep on the mule. Also, I keep a little cordless 1/4-inch impact that is super useful in case you run into a situation. Keep a few bungees on the mule, just to have in case you're hauling something that doesn't quite fit in the truck bed. You can strap it so it doesn't fall out. And then here I have built this little homemade side box because I wanted a place to keep some odds and ends hand tools and some hardware that doesn't take up space in my truck bed, so that way I can haul things. In here I'll keep a staple gun, I'll keep vice grips. Vice grips are like the duct tape of tools. They work for so many things. Keep those on hand. Keep a pair of wire cutters. I keep a box blade. I keep some pliers, some channel locks, and also I keep a square. You never know when you're going to do a little bit of carpentry work. Keep a roll of Gorilla Tape, but as you can see, this thing is run low. Fence staples and deck screws, measuring tape, and and then some spare staples for the staple gun. Those are all just kind of handy things to have, because believe me, when you're out on the back of the property and you don't really know you're about to tackle a project, you discover that there's a project that you need to tackle, it's kind of inconvenient to have to run all the way back up to the shop to grab what you need to go back out there, especially whenever it comes to everyday mundane things that you can carry with you wherever you go. And if you see a project, you can get it taken care of right then and there, so that way you don't forget about it and it gets taken care of. And believe me, there's always something to do. And though you may set out to start your day doing something else, you'll discover something along the way. Especially the larger your operation gets, the more tendency you'll have to find things along the way while you're doing your work. You find every day, you know, here and there items that need to be addressed and taken care of. This mule does have a dump bed. It is not a hydraulic dump, it's just a manual dump, and that's useful if you're carrying something like mulch or something like that you want to dump out. You can fill this bed up, and then there's a little latch there, and then you just pick up on this handle and it dumps out. Super useful. Up on the front of the mule, I have another storage compartment right here. Most side-by-sides have something along these lines. And in here, I keep a cargo strap, I keep a chain, I keep some fuel stabilizer on hand. I keep bar oil in here, as well as two-stroke oil, because those are two kind of relatively common items that you may kind of forget in the shop. You grab the chainsaw, you go out to go do some work, and you're like, well, man, I'm out of bar oil, I got to run all the way back. I've got some on hand. As well as I keep a very useful little tool here. Let's undo this one-handed here. I keep a little useful tool that is a DC powered chainsaw file, electric chainsaw file, so I can sharpen chainsaw chains. So there's nothing worse than getting out to do some tree trimming, and you go out to get some work done and discover that you're about halfway through a tree and discover that your chainsaw blade or your chainsaw chain is dull. So having that on hand, I can just clip it to the battery or plug it into the 12-volt DC outlet, and I can sharpen up a chain real quick, so that way I don't waste a ton of time or lose any time on my day on my project. Especially in the winter months when you don't have a ton of daylight, it is important to be able to do things as efficiently and effectively as possible. So that's where this comes in handy. Like I said, it may be considered a luxury item, and yes, you could do all the things that this can do without it, but it takes more time to do. And when you're working with limited daylight hours, especially in the wintertime, that's where this kind of becomes a necessity. It increases productivity, which in turn benefits your customers, benefits the product, benefits your animals if you are able to save time when doing anything project-wise. So that's kind of the rundown on this. Also, I keep a fire extinguisher on here. Honestly, it wasn't something I thought about until when I got this thing. I bought this used, obviously, and it came with this fire extinguisher. And now that I've had it, I've kind of been thinking, man, that's useful to keep around. So these are inexpensive, they don't cost a whole lot. So, go pick one up, stick it on the mule, and it'll be a nice little safety item to have. I generally also carry gloves as well. So right now I've got just kind of mechanic working gloves, mostly because it's cold outside and I'm keeping my hands warm. But these type gloves do not stand up well to barbed wire. They get ripped to shreds if you're doing any work with barbed wire. So it's good to have some good cowhide leather gloves of some kind. I keep those handy in case I need to handle some barbed wire. One, I'm not going to hurt myself with those gloves handling barbed wire, and two, I'm not going to tear up a pair of gloves just because I got them near barbed wire, because that's what barbed wire will do to your gloves. So this thing, like I said, it hauls a lot of stuff every single day. So with this 2-inch ball, I can pull a full-size trailer, which is another item that I will get to here in a second. First, I want to discuss the UTV trailer, which I use a little bit more frequently on a day-to-day basis. This one has been through it. You can see it is muddy, it is dirty, and let's get a good angle here so we can see that that axle is bent. Now, like I said, I've put this thing through its paces. That wheel is a little bent. It was worse. I bent it back a little bit, but this thing is pretty neat. It does have a dump feature where you can unlatch it right here, and you can dump it, lift that trailer up and dump it if you're carrying, again, something that you want to dump out of here. All of these guardrails come off, these sides flip down, it can make it into a flatbed, and I think I picked this thing up for about 200 bucks. Brand new. You can buy them from Harbor Freight, Northern Tool, basically wherever. Atwood's Tractor Supply will have similar models to this. This one is a slightly longer one than a lot of the ones that are the more common size. They're about yay long. They kind of cut off right here. I wanted a slightly longer one because this way you can fit like a full-size shovel and stuff in it without it hanging over the edge, and you can carry more, firewood, more supplies, things of that nature as you're working. This right now, I've got a bunch of tools kept in it. I don't always have it loaded with tools, but I have been doing some fence work lately, and so I've got a bunch of tools in here that are specific for doing barbed wire fencing, things of that nature, which are more tools and equipment that I recommend keeping on a farm. Another trailer to have, I recommend keeping a utility trailer on hand. Again, you may not have necessarily considered the expense when getting into getting a farm. Having a utility trailer is invaluable. You don't necessarily have to have one with sides. I built these sides myself. I'm actually going to change this out. That's going to be another project. I'm going to build metal sides for this, do some welding and weld it on. I built these primarily temporarily, and they've stayed on there for a while. This is a 6x12, and this thing has hauled everything from furniture to straw and hay to pigs. This actually has been used as a pig trailer. I wouldn't recommend hauling larger livestock with one of these, but they're useful to have around, and you'll need at least a trailer. Trust me, whenever I say this, you'll need at least a trailer. So factor that into your budget. So some of the equipment that you need, especially if you're going to be raising any larger livestock, you're going to be needing to do some fencing. So if you're going to be needing to do some fence work, probably the coolest tool that I have involving doing anything fence work is this bad boy right here. So this is a gas-powered T-post driver, and this thing will drive T-posts to the ground in seconds. I don't even own a manual T-post driver. One of those pile drivers that you have to bang the T-post several times just to get it to go a few inches in the ground. I don't even own one, because that thing is so useful. Even if I just have to drive one T-post, it saves so much time and effort. You can find these ones on Amazon for like 300 bucks. Generally, the average cost of them is around $700 to $1,600. It varies so wildly. So you'll have to just get online, do some research, and see what you can find. That one's a relatively cheap brand. It's worked for me. And then I have a gas-powered auger, which is your post hole digger. That's something that's super useful because you'll have to, at some point or another, put some wooden fence posts in. Whether you're putting up a gate, whether you're building an H-brace or a corner brace for your barbed wire fencing, those are useful tools to have on hand. And these again, not necessarily necessary, but trust me whenever I say this, if you have to do 16, 17 post holes in a day, or just over a project, that'll save you so much time over manually digging your fence posts, your post holes. A farm jack. This is something that every farmer should own, and that is one of these guys right here. Oh dear. All right. This is a farm jack. Some people may call it an off-road jack or a lift-all or what have you, but this thing is super useful. It lifts, this one is a 7,000 pound farm jack. You can use it to jack up things like your side-by-side. You can use it to jack up your zero turn to do some work underneath it or something along those lines. But also, you can use it as a T-post removal tool. Say you've got a T-post that you need to take out of the ground. I've got this little handy adapter here that will hook on a T-post, and I'll show you that real quick. My pigs are making noises. What you being so noisy for? So you just stick this guy right in here, and then you can hook the farm jack into here and jack it up, and it will pull any T-post out of the ground. They make specific tools just for T-post pulling, and you can get one of those T-post pullers. However, I recommend the farm jack and the adapter plate if you had to pick just one, because the farm jack also does so much more. You'll need a chainsaw. Have to have one. That is absolutely necessary, and a lot of people probably already own one. So you may not have to factor that into your budget. Running down the list here as far as tools go, we'll take a gander in the shop, take a look-see in here, and I can go over a few more things, a few more items that you all may need. All right. So, coming into the shop here, turn on the lights so we can see. All right. So, basically, it's a good idea to just have standard landscape equipment of some kind. I have a pair of string trimmers. I have a pair of them because a lot of times some projects take a couple people to get them done in a timely fashion. So I have a pair of them so that way we can use multiple tools. Many different brands make string trimmers that have universal attachments, and they're super useful. So, and they're universal. Like this is not even a Craftsman brand, and I've got a Craftsman string trimmer head that works with this. This is a brush trimmer. It's basically a weed eater for thicker stuff. You got a pole saw extension. These are useful and necessary if you're trying to trim up trees that are a little bit higher up and difficult to get to. Saves you from having to get on a ladder and handle the chainsaw, which is or climb a tree, which is kind of a risky business. Now, obviously you got your string trimmers here. I have a generator. That's a useful tool. I don't use it a ton, but nice to have. And then all of my various gases. I've got just 87 octane, a 25-to-1 mix, 40-to-1 mix, diesel, and that I think is just a spare can. So basically your basics whenever it comes to lawn care and just tree trimming and things of that nature. I have an old zero turn that does the trick for mowing the areas that need mowing, which most of the time is just around the house. The animals kind of take care of a lot of the rest. So that's kind of a rundown of the basic equipment that you kind of need that is helpful running a farm. You also should have a lot of just standalone or a lot of handyman type tools. You need a good set of hand tools. It's a good idea to have, your screwdrivers, wrenches, pliers, hammers, things of that nature. And it's also not a terrible idea to have woodworking tools, miter saw, router, skill saw, circular saw, cordless set, table saw, super useful to have around, and then air compressor. So a lot of these woodworking tools I would say are pretty necessary, but air compressor, you'll need it. So that kind of covers a basic idea of equipment. And I know this is a lot, not to mention you need shovels. Good to have a shovels, mattock or pickaxe of some kind, and like a gravel rake, things of that nature that I keep laying around. Some of my other shovels and tools are in that trailer back over there. And I'm hoping I'm not missing anything. I'm trying to cover everything. That's kind of basically everything you need, at the very least need to just have. Now, with equipment, kind of that subject kind of taken care of, I want to talk to you about supplies, things that you should just keep on hand, because I'll tell you this, depending upon where you have your farm at, you may be a long ways away from going and picking up supplies. For instance, if I need lumber and stuff, I am an hour drive to the nearest home improvement store. Now there's some minor supplies that I can get, like plumbing supplies and things like that, at a closer store. It's 20 minutes for me, but if I need lumber, I'm an hour drive away. So I keep on hand, and I recommend every farmer do, keep on hand some various dimensional lumber. Like, we got pressure treated 2x4s, 4x4, whole bunch of 2x4 studs. Those are 2x3s. You don't necessarily need to keep those on hand. That's just for a specific project. And then also over here, I've got a whole bunch of 1x4 furring strips that are gonna end up being turned into trim work. And then a couple spare pieces of roof panels, which is, that particular kind is Ondura. I highly recommend it. It's a good composite roofing that you can use for a lot of your farm animal projects. Some other supplies that you should be keeping on hand. Keep brake cleaner. It's very useful if you're doing any mechanical work at all, or even just even if you're not doing necessarily mechanical work. If you've got to clean up some tools or something along those lines because they got dirty or rusty or something, that's useful to have. Some PB Blaster or WD-40, some type of spray lubricant. Flex Seal, good useful thing to have on hand in case something starts leaking that shouldn't be leaking, that can be handled with that. That's good to keep around. Something I'm out of that I highly recommend you keep several cans of is Fix-A-Flat. Keep Fix-A-Flat, because I don't care what type of equipment you have, you're probably gonna have tires, and at some point or another, you're gonna have a flat tire. And it will be useful to at least do a quick fix until it'll let you keep your day going to get your day done before you need to go buy a spare tire or get that tire fixed or something along those lines. So keep Fix-A-Flat on hand. And then some sort of degreaser, basic stuff that you may need. That's a simple green bottle, but it's actually Purple Power. We've got a whole bunch of it. Spare bag of Sakrete, or Quikrete, instant, concrete mix of some kind. I usually keep some on hand. I usually actually have a couple bags, but just got done putting a couple posts in, so that's just my one leftover. Now, if you're doing any fencing, if you have any fence at all, you need to keep extra T-posts on hand, which I'm low on, need to go resupply. And then if you're running hot wires, keep extra electric fence supplies on hand. This is extremely important. And I'll say this because, if you're running a hot wire, odds are you're doing it to keep your livestock in an area that they need to be in. If your fence goes down for whatever reason, and you need to make a repair on said fence, you need to have the supplies on hand on your farm. They have to be on your farm. Otherwise, you could be facing, disaster. If you've got to drive 20 minutes one way to go pick up some extra fence supplies, and your animals get out in that time duration before you get a chance to to fix it, then you've got to go wrangle animals, or worse, you'll lose animals, things along those lines. So keep extra electric fencing items on hand. I've got some extra stakes with insulators already put on them, ready to go. I'm actually really low. I've got some on its way in the mail as we speak because I've run low on them. I keep extra poly rope. I already briefly discussed poly rope, but didn't really go over it. This is an electric fence rope. It is just a, it's just a basically a braided rope with electric wire braided into it. This stuff is the cheap stuff. This is slightly more expensive, more durable, and I actually like this this Gallagher brand stuff. It's real good, and it is worth the money. Keep some insulated electric fence leads on hand. I've got a full spool here and a spare spool. I hate using this stuff. Not a big fan of it, honestly, for electric fence, but I keep some around, primarily because I had this used on my front pasture. I took it all down and swapped it over to poly rope because I like working with it so much better. So I end up having a whole bunch of spare of that, and really what I use it for now is wire ties. You don't have to spend a little bit extra money on like galvanized fence wire, but I recommend keeping some sort of wire on hand to use as wire ties. That's useful to have. Fence insulators, various fence insulators. I've got my 5-inch T-post insulators. I have the screw type insulators for round posts, my wood post insulators that just screw in. These kind are useful to have around as well. Some various connector leads. I've got a couple of electric fence handles that I don't really use a ton of, but they're I use them on occasion, and so those are useful to keep around. So your electric fence supplies. Now this is my spools of poly rope that go up for my temporary paddocks whenever I'm rotating my animals in the back pasture, and I keep them on a spool so that I can spool them up and move them to the next pasture, and then unspool them, and it makes it a whole lot easier than doing it all by hand. And so these guys are my spools, basically ready to go for once we move the animals to the back pasture. So these are necessary. You need to keep electric fence supplies on hand because you never know when you need to repair that fence to protect your animals. So another couple things keep on hand: keep some extra fence staples, keep zip ties. I cannot tell you, in fact, these need to go on the mule. These normally get carried on the mule. I actually just ran out. This is my spare supply, so I gotta buy some more. Zip ties are a farmer's best friend. Zip ties and duct tape fix just about anything. Keep deck screws. Keep some spare float valves for my automatic watering systems that honestly haven't got integrated yet on this farm. That's, again, another project coming shortly to you for your viewing pleasure. And that's kind of basics of the things that you ought to keep on hand. Another quick tip in the wintertime, good idea to keep some ice melt on hand. That's not even necessarily just a farm thing. It's a good thing to have on hand just in a residential area. In case your front sidewalk or something gets iced over, sprinkle that stuff on there. Saves everyone from slipping, falling, and not being able to get back up. It's a good idea to have a good amount of straw. Even if you think you're good on straw for a little while, just have a good backup in case you get a lot of wet weather. You need to put some dry bedding down, make the animals more comfortable. That's the way to go. Water totes. I highly recommend keeping some of these on hand. They're good for multiple uses, good for several projects. I would keep a minimum of one spare one on hand. These are actually slotted for some projects, so I need to go pick up another one so I have a spare in case I need to, tackle another project or something. These, a lot of times you can pick up relatively inexpensively. It varies depending upon whether they're food grade, what was stored in them beforehand, but a lot of times you can buy them relatively cheap. Like these actually used to house fertilizer. And I bought these for $40 a piece. I'm gonna have to clean them out for the purposes that I'm going to put them to. One of them is gonna become a feeder. One of them is gonna become a water storage. So they've gotta be cleaned out pretty good. But those are useful things to keep on hand if need be. Oh, one other piece of equipment that I kind of forgot because it's wintertime, so I don't use it hardly ever. Not this scooter. I rarely use that scooter. It's a little too small for me. But a tank sprayer. This is relatively inexpensive as well. They're about $100, give or take. Sometimes they go on sale. I think this one was like $70 at the time. And then some herbicides. And that's good to have on hand, so that way you can spray your fence line. Good fence line management is keeping that fence line free of weeds and vines and stuff, especially if you're running a hot wire. Keeps that hot wire hot, and also just looks more aesthetically pleasing to have a good clean fence line versus having a whole bunch of vines and stuff growing up on there. So that more or less covers a lot of stuff. I hope it covers basically everything. So that way it gives you folks a good idea if you're thinking about starting a farm and you're thinking, where do I be, you know, some people overlook that altogether, the equipment and the supplies and stuff that you need on hand. Some people overlook that and think, okay, well, I found this, you know, a good deal on a good property, and I'm gonna go out there and just kind of wing it. And then they completely overlook all this and realize that, you know, thousands of dollars later, they weren't quite budgeting for all of this stuff. So I'm hoping that this list will help you determine what you need to do to save up to help you get a quicker start to your farm. Because sometimes people move out there and then discover that they've run out of money in their budget because they didn't realize how much money they needed to set aside, and then it is a slower process getting started. So if you're planning on looking for a piece of property or a farm and you're wanting to be as operational as quickly as possible, have these things in mind, have these pieces of equipment, these supplies in mind, so that way when you get out there, you're ready to go. You're ready to hit the ground running and take charge of your farm. One more thing as well, pallets. Pallets are either free or cheap, and they are something that have many uses. You can use them as small gates. You can use them for good dry storage. You always want to store straw and hay up off the ground to prevent mold and mildew and stuff from growing on them. They're just invaluable to keep around the farm, especially considering that they typically don't have a cost. A lot of times they're free. You can go to a lot of smaller businesses. They get things shipped on pallets. Sometimes they just give them away for free. So do a little due diligence, look around your local area and find out where you can pick up some pallets. Even if you can't get them for free, you can probably buy some cheap, you know, talking $2-4 a piece or something along those lines. So those are useful to have. I built many things out of pallets. I use them for all kinds of things. My pig's water trough is set up on those pallets there. Which, by the way, this thing was a water tote that was on the farm already, and I just cut a hole out there. Allows the pigs to get their head in there to drink water. And that thing, even without an automatic watering system, I only have to, right now in the wintertime when it's not hot, I only have to fill it like once, maybe twice a week. But the way that that's set up, instead of having just a bucket, it keeps them from making a mess. If you just have like a bucket in here somewhere, they will either tip it over or they'll make a mud pit. Notice around this, there's no mud. It's not a mud pit because all they can do is get their heads in there. They can't get all the way in it and they can't tip it over. So they don't, and it also keeps the water a little bit more clean. It still gets a little dirty because their snouts, their noses are oftentimes a little dirty, so they'll get in the water and they'll get a little bit dirty, but they can't step in it, so that kind of cuts down on the mess and doesn't require me to have to clean it out as often as like a water bucket would. So that's a useful water tote tip for pigs. I'd highly recommend it. Also, that water tote does have, you can see, a extension cord running into it. I've got a stock tank heater. So one more thing that you need to keep in mind: in the wintertime, water freezes, so all of your animals still need to drink water in the wintertime. So keep stock tank heaters. Have at least enough for all of your water troughs or water buckets, however you're watering your animals, and then have a spare. Have enough for all of your waters, and then have one spare, because if one breaks, it's easier to just go into your shop or garage or carport or wherever you're storing it, get it out, drop it in there, and be good for the day until the next time you get to make a run into town. It's another thing that people oftentimes don't take into consideration is when they say, oh, I'm moving out, it's only 40 minutes away. If you're having to run to town every day because you're finding yourself short on some sort of supplies, it starts costing money and fuel, and it takes a lot of your time up. So stock up on a few items, keep your everyday useful supplies and items on hand, so that way, instead of having to go 2-3 times a week to town to go pick up your supplies, you can cut that down to where you only have to go into town once a week, once every other week, things of that nature. That's a big useful thing. I know it costs more to stock up on supplies, but once you have them, that cost, it's not as costly, and it really will end up saving you money in the long run, because you're not having to run to the store so frequently. You've got things already, because a lot of times when you need to address a problem on the farm, you need to address it immediately. And so having to drive to town really makes it difficult to address it immediately if you don't have the supplies on hand. So I hope this has been informative. I know this is another longer video, but I really wanted to cover all of the bases, especially for people who are not necessarily familiar with what they're going to need in order to get started on the farm. And that way you're going into it with your eyes open, and you're not caught off guard once you get out. You get set up and you think to yourself that you're ready to get animals, and then you do, and then it becomes a headache, a nightmare, a mess. So if you like this video, if you found some value in it, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, hit subscribe and turn the notification on so you don't miss any of my videos. Now, if you have any suggestions for videos or topics you'd like me to cover, hit me up in the comment section below and let me know. Also, let me know if I missed anything. If there's any farmers out there or any experts in this field, and you know of some pieces of equipment that are super useful that I missed, or supplies that you need to keep on hand that I missed, mention that in the comments below, because either I forgot to mention it, or maybe it's something I haven't thought of, and I'd like to know that, so that way I can add that to my regular supplies that I keep on the farm. So I hope that you all have enjoyed this, and I will continue to try and produce as many informative videos as I can. And coming up soon, we've got some DIY projects. We have a feeder that needs to be built. We have an automatic watering system that's about to get put together. And we've got rotational pasture paddocks that we'll be putting up, that you guys can see how they work and what you need in order to do some rotational grazing. So until the next time, we will see you folks again very soon back at the ranch. Buckets. Don't forget 5-gallon buckets. Need a lot of those. Keep them on hand. Okay, now we're done. You like the belly rubs, don't you? Oh, the good piggy. Where's your good piggy?